Good morning, everybody. So nice to be with you here on a Sunday. My husband Rob and I joined Belay in February of 2023, and we mostly attend Tuesday night services, so it's really great to be here on a Sunday. A couple weeks ago, we attended Sunday service, and when we walked through that door, we walked through the house, and every person that we saw, we either exchanged hugs or how have you been? And we left that day just with our cups were full, and we realized that we had the community that we'd really been seeking out. So that's a big part of me being comfortable to stand up and share this with you today. Also, a couple Tuesday night services ago, a couple people also got up to share their testimonies and their stories. And I just felt this shift in my heart, and I felt the Lord telling me it was time for me to share. So I reached out to Paul, and I'm glad that I did practice quick obedience in that moment, because I have to admit, if I had pushed it off, I would have made excuses, and I don't think that I would be here this morning. So I'm going to share a little bit of my story, and also talk a little bit about spiritual warfare in this. How many of you heard this term before? Or how many of you, is this the first time you're hearing this term, spiritual warfare? So Paul writes in Ephesians 6:12, "For our struggle is not against the flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms." There's an ongoing battle between the kingdom of God and Satan and his army. And I hope as I share this message with you today, and I share how I was able to identify my own spiritual battle, that this will help you in your own walk and journey with the Lord. So I'll start my story from the beginning. Born and raised in New Jersey. I'm one of 6 kids. I have a big family. I absolutely adore them. I miss them a lot. None of them will move out here with me, but this might come as a surprise to you. But at a very young age, I was a very angry child. I was a very spicy child. I was always very resistant, always pushing back. I was spanked all the time. There were home videos where my dad was recording and suddenly it cut short, and then it'd come back on, and I'd be up in my room because I was being punished for some reason. So this kind of continued on, this pattern. My mom homeschooled us all. And that's when I saw it the most, is her and I just kind of go at it. We would yell at each other over schoolwork that I just didn't want to do, I didn't see any point in. And we would fight, and we would yell. We'd walk away, and by the end of the day, we'd always come back together, and we apologize, and we hug, and completely move on. I don't look back on these as jarring memories. It's not traumatizing. It was just normalized to just yell and fight, but then completely move on. And then at the age of 19, my mom gave me this resource, this book called The 5 Love Languages. The 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman explains that each person has a primary love language, a way of giving and receiving love that resonates with them most deeply. The 5 love languages are quality time, physical touch, acts of service, words of affirmation, and gift giving. Gary writes on expressing love in ways that speak directly to your partner, friend, coworker, any relationship in your life. Speaking to their emotional needs can transform your relationship, leading to a greater intimacy and connection and fulfillment as you give and receive love in different ways. This was a really helpful tool for me to start to understand some of my anger and maybe why I wasn't feeling like I was receiving love or I didn't know how to give love. But this started to shift things in me, and I started to realize that I do have more control over my emotions than I recognized. So when I turned 21, I think, oh, I'm doing great. I'm so much happier. I'm not fighting with my parents anymore. Things are going really well. I got the opportunity to move down to Florida and work at Disney World, which was awesome. And yeah, that was the beginning of a 4-year journey with Disney. And let me tell you, it's very easy to be a light when you are living and working in the most magical place on earth, in the happiest place on earth. So during that time, that's when I met Rob, and him and I were just friends for a long time before we turned that into our relationship. A couple years later, Right around that same time where Rob and I went from being more than friends to pursuing our relationship, I began to develop an eating disorder. And I just really struggled with body image issues in my relationship with food. I honestly didn't realize how bad it was because I wasn't sharing it with anybody. Rob and I were doing long distance at the time, and so it was really easy to hide from him. My roommate that I was living with, her and I had opposite schedules, so she didn't see it. And in my mind, I was like, oh, well, once I get back to this weight, I'm gonna be fine and I'll be maintaining it and it's great. So I kind of swept it under the rug, but it was definitely a much bigger part of my journey than I realized. In June of 2020, Rob and I got married, and we packed up all our things and we moved out to California because we thought mountains, beaches, what could be more perfect for us? And this is also, you know, when you're together, you can't hide things anymore. And so this is where Rob got to see some of that anger coming out, and my relationship with food. I had to be open, I had to be honest. Before we got married, I can honestly say I cannot recall a time where Rob and I really got in a bad argument. Of course we argued, arguing is normal, but I thought I was just good. I thought I was matured, I thought I had moved past that. But like I said, you know, you can't hide those things any longer when you're living day in and day out with somebody. So after we get to California, Rob had gone out there, we had gone out there to follow a job opportunity for Rob that didn't really pan out. And so he started applying other places, more that he was interested in, and he applied for a job in Gunnison, Colorado. I don't know if you guys have spent time out in Gunnison or Crested Butte, but it's a 4 square mile town, about 4.5 hours away from here with 7,000 people. And you have to take a mountain pass to get into it, either whatever direction you're coming in. It's extremely isolated. So when we arrived, or actually before we arrived, Rob and I at that time were driving we had 2 cars. And I'm in one, he's in the other, and I'm in one just in tears. I don't want to move to Colorado, I don't want to live in the cold. And he is singing his heart out to Rocky Mountain High by John Denver. He is elated. He could not wait to move to the mountains. So we arrive, and he's so excited. He's ready to pour into all of his hobbies and activities, and in the meanwhile, I feel lost. And that's when I started to sink into depression. I was dealing with depression, anxiety, my eating disorder. I began drinking too much, and I saw my anger resurfacing. I felt completely out of control. I wish I could say I went to therapy or I got help or at least heavily relied on Jesus, but I didn't. I was really convinced that I could do this all on my own, that I could bring my happy, joyful, optimistic, positive self back, because that's who I am. That's always who I thought I was. However, every day I continue to struggle with this identity crisis. Everything that I began to fear that everything that Rob had fallen in love with me for was no longer there. Also, we tried to plug into the community. It was tough, a small town, it's during COVID. And before every event, I just remember being in tears. I was just so anxious to show up because I knew what I wanted to do was show up, and I wanted to be positive. I wanted to be my light. And every time I did that, I just felt like such a fraud. And it was so confusing because my mind was telling me this is who you are, but inside I just felt so empty. I remember one day I went on this walk, and it was just the darkest I'd ever felt. I couldn't control the loud voices in my head. I thought that was just something people said, but truly on this walk, I felt like I was being screamed at. I felt like I had just lost control. I had passing suicidal thoughts, and I finally understood why people are in this place, because you feel so out of control. You don't want to bother people. You don't want to call your friend that you know you have. You don't want to call your family member you know that says they're there for you. You don't want to do it because you don't want to burden them. And maybe it's also because you don't want to admit how bad it really is. So this was just confusing and exhausting to finally, to feel like I was playing these charades. And like Matt had said earlier, in the mountain towns, it's a tough place to be. You're living in, the most beautiful place. You know, I was hiking all the time, biking, skiing. It was incredible. But I would return home and I felt empty. It just felt empty. At this time, my anger was definitely starting to resurface, and of course, I was taking it out on the person that I loved the most, Rob. He was the only one that was there with me. I remember screaming at him, and just in tears, screaming, saying, I don't like who I am. I didn't want to be like this anymore. And I was scared that this anger came back in my life. I was scared of what I was seeing. So I called my mom, and we started talking about it. And this is such a blessing that I do have my mom that I can call and that she receives me, that I can ask her, hey, why am I angry? What's going on? And we started talking about family lineage, and she tells me that her dad normalized yelling, and her and I would yell, and so it is something that's kind of been passed along. She also mentioned that her anger has also come from a place of needing control. And so I started to recognize that in my life, that when I felt out of control, that is when my anger came up. So after a year living in Gunnison, going through the highs and lows, my husband, Rob, he convinced his best friend from childhood to move out. And I had met his wife maybe twice at that point, and her and I had actually really bonded over our eating disorders. Her and I would text each other and check in, so we had been in relationship for about a year. And he convinced them to move to Gunnison. And you would think I'd be so happy, that we were going to have friends, we're going to have community, but I was so angry. I was so bitter, and I was so confused by this. I didn't understand why I wasn't excited they were going to move out here. So they moved out. Within that first week, I texted her, and I said, can you come over? And I told her the truth. I just told her, I said, I've been dealing with anger that you guys are moving here. I'm confused about it. And thank goodness, she had a strong relationship with the Lord, because her first response was that this is spiritual warfare. And Satan is going to attack anything that is going to build the Lord's kingdom up. And I believe that you and I are going to do something really good here. And I actually didn't recognize it at the time until I gave her a phone call just a few days ago, and I shared some of the story with her. That I'm not even sure about the other lives we may have touched, but she really touched mine. And she really opened my eyes up to spiritual warfare. So I just want to take a moment here and give you guys a minute to think about what this might look like in your own life as I continue to share my story. Just a couple things that it could be lust, pornography, envy, pride, selfishness, even hurriness, even busy. I think that some of these will be easier to identify than others. But I want to give everybody just a moment to think about that. And if anything comes to mind, that's great. And if not, maybe it will come to mind later on. But I'd like to give you a moment to think about it, and then I want to pray over you all. Lord, I want to welcome you into this space today. Thank you for being here. I just want to pray over each person that came today. I pray that you will help them identify if there is something going on, identify what it is. And I pray that they would see the community they have here at Belay and know they have someone to talk to, and know that they have a Lord that loves them and wants to heal them. Lord, you are so good, and you meet us where we're at. We don't have to step up to a certain place to meet with you. You meet us where we're at. So next step, after that, that next year got so much better. I wasn't crying every day anymore, which was great. My relationship with food was getting so much better. I wasn't drinking excessively. My moments of anger were becoming less and less. I started doing hair again. I started finding community in that. I started finding passion in that. I received mentorship in that. And I was healing. And it felt really good. And just so you all know, healing can often take a very long time. I'm sure some of you know this already. So I would say it was the next couple years, but that first year was like, wow, okay, things are shifting, things are happening. So I started to recognize I was seeking a lot of joy in so many different things, or I was trying to seek joy in so many different things that were leaving me empty. After 2 years of being in Gunnison, Rob and I left. We put our stuff in storage and we lived out a dream of ours. We went and traveled for 3 months, which was amazing. And while we were out there, we didn't know we were going to return back to. But we made a list of things that felt like the top priority, and Boulder began to check off all those boxes. Before we even left, we were in Europe. Before we left Europe, we were Googling churches because that felt like it needed to be the number one top priority. And Rob, of course, was attracted to the one with the climbing term, so he's a big climber. And after 2 weeks of arriving in Boulder, we came to this church. And I remember we were sitting right over there in the fireplace. And Rob and I don't think we got to move for a whole hour after service because so many people came over and introduced themselves and welcomed us. And that meant a lot. So the first year in Boulder here was kind of a whirlwind, jumping into new jobs, new community, just trying to lay that foundation. If any of you have moved before, you know that can be really, really tough, but you got to stick it out. But as year 2 began to roll around and we were consistently attending Tuesday nights, Rob and I began meeting with Paul and Patty individually once a month, receiving mentorship through them. I began to hear about fasting. Over and over, I was hearing it in conversation, I was hearing it in sermons, and reading it just kept coming up in the Bible. And then I learned it was a spiritual discipline, and I felt compelled to practice this. And at first it was honestly confusing, it was frustrating. I wasn't sure if I was okay to do this with my previous relationship with food. But I decided I was going to stick it out, knowing it was a discipline. Something that was helpful for me is I started seeking out answers through different resources and people. And John Mark Comer is a pastor in Portland, Oregon. He's really great. I love listening to his sermons, and he's written a couple great books. But he did a 4-part series on different types of and reasons for fasting. And as I listened to each episode, it shed some light on different intentions while fasting. And then one day I remember I was talking to Janice over there, and I said I was just confused about it. I'm trying to practice this. It seems so much easier for Rob than it is for me. And she had mentioned something along the lines that it helps get the spiritual garbage out. And I didn't really know what that meant at first. So I was like, okay, yeah, I'm sure it's going to shed some light on some icky things. And as I thought over that and I spent the next few weeks fasting, my anger was brought back up. And that's when I realized that that's very much that spiritual gunk I want to get out. So I started fasting an extra day in dedication to my anger. And on those days, I felt more angrier than ever. And of course, not eating is part of that, low energy. But I just felt so confused. I'm like, why, Lord, I feel like I'm giving this to you. And why does it feel like it's getting harder? So I recently turned 30 in September. And yeah, woohoo, yeah, I know. I had to ask Paul, I'm like, can I wear my shoes? Because I really need foot support. So yeah, it's great. But yeah, I recently turned 30 and I wanted to leave my anger behind in my 20s. It's like, okay, I want to do this. I want to leave it behind. Again, just convinced that that's how it could work, right? Can just leave something behind. And the day after I turned 30, it was just like this cloud set in. And at first I was like, oh, maybe it's the come down from the celebrations and me being so excited. But the next few days it just lingered. And so I decided to go out for a run. I love connecting with the Lord in nature. The leaves are changing, it's beautiful. And all these things that normally bring me joy, I could not. I was so disconnected. And I remember a friend had told me one time, she said, sometimes you just need to get on your knees and you need to pray. So I got there down on the dirt and I just started praying to the Lord. And he reminded me this is an ongoing battle. And he reminded me that Satan is really good at telling you the lies. So, Joel 2:12 says, even now declares the Lord, return to me with all your heart, with fasting and weeping and mourning. Rend your heart and not your garments. Rend to the Lord your God, for he is gracious, compassionate, slow to anger, and abounding in love. So as I share this story with you today, I think I reached out to Paul maybe 2 weeks ago about it. And I was really hoping that this was something that I could speak in the past tense. But writing this message is making me realize it's very much present tense. This is something I'm working through right now. In these 2 weeks of building this message, I felt so attacked. I felt I'm reliving some of this pain and just felt like in a dark place. And I received a text from Patty saying, you have said yes to the Lord, and the enemy will do anything and everything he can to stop you. 1 Peter 5:8, be alert and sober of mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. I also was listening to some Belay Church podcasts, and Tien gave a beautiful message about walking in freedom. Tien. It's really great. I would highly recommend. And in this message, she said, as I get closer to God, I feel more broken. What else do we expect when we come close to the light? Our brokenness can no longer hide in the dark as we step into the light. It's a convicting light, though. It's not a condemning light. Often he doesn't change how we feel in the moment, but when we ask for help as we act in obedience, despite how we feel, that is our freedom unfolding. That is us living for a higher truth than just what we feel. James 4:7-10 says, submit yourselves, aka surrender yourselves, then to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Come near to God, and he will come near to you. Wash your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Grieve, mourn, wail. Change your laughter into mourning and your joy into gloom. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up. It's okay to hurt, and it's okay to grieve. And healing often does hurt first, and it can continue to hurt. It's not something that will necessarily always go away. So what can we do? Luke 22:31-32 says, Simon, Simon, Satan has asked you to sift all of you as wheat. But I've prayed for you, Simon, that your faith may not fail, and that when you've turned back, strengthen your brothers. So here as I share my story today, I hope that this can be something that strengthens you, and that this can be something that we use to strengthen each other as we open up and we're vulnerable and we share our stories. Paul had mentioned when we met before I gave this message, he said, I think that there could be more of this for you in your future. And after these past 2 weeks of building this message, I've thought, oh, please no. Please no, because it was just, I felt attacked. But I was reminded, I have told you these things so that you may have peace. And in this world you will have trouble. But take heart, I have overcome the world. John 16:33. So just as a reminder, some of the things that have helped me in my journey have been prayer, fasting, community and mentorship, the Bible, which is the truth, resources such as books and podcasts. I think the more immersed you are in anything, the more you're going to start to understand, the more dots you're going to start to connect. Belay has something really, really special here. I really, really believe that. This community is doing something amazing, and I just want to continue to be a part of it. When the voices are too loud in your head, or you're feeling attacked and you feel like you can't find your way out, that's when you need the truth. The enemy loves to tell you lies. And you need to surround yourself with people who can speak truth into you, because the enemy is not welcome here. So just as a reminder, belay, I thought I added this into my notes. Let's see if I memorize it from the brain. But belay is a place to belong, believe, become, and belay. Thank you. Bonus points. There we go. And I want to belay each other. And that was a big part of me sharing this message, is that I want to hold each other up, because that's what we're going to need. And it's scary to be vulnerable, but it's important. So if anybody has any questions for me or wants to follow up on any parts of the story, if anything really resonated with you, I'd really like you to come and see me. I have a couple different resources. Something I meant to mention a little bit earlier on is that friend that taught me what spiritual warfare was. She is starting a faith-based life coaching program for women. And I spoke to her about that, and that could be an amazing resource if anybody needs that. Some of these books that I mentioned and podcasts, I want to share those because they've been so helpful for me. So yeah, if you guys have any questions after, I'll be sticking around. You can come and chat with me.